Welcome to another episode. Hello, Father.
Hello, Shane.
And good to see you.
You too?
Welcome back from your vacation.
It's a good one.
Oh, we're in ordinary time now.
We are second week.
Ordinary time. Christmas came, in and out in a hurry. Well, we're 3 weeks away from the season of Lent,
We are.
which feels like I just left the season of Lent. It was the longest Lent of all time last year. I have decided, I know we'll probably end up talking about Lent some way in a few weeks, but I have decided I'm not going to be quite as austere this year as I was last year.
I'm just praying about what the Lord wants from me this year.
Yeah.
I think it should
Any
be
ideas?
intentional Lent. No ideas.
Well, we
I
know.
might be doing a reflection on Brother Lawrence, The Presence of God. Practically the Presence
Oh,
of
yeah.
God. I've never read it, but it
Classic.
might be something that I might choose personally to do. But I think just diving into the liturgy and the readings that are selected and just soaking up what the church is already serving up for us, as it were, for Lent.
Mm-hmm.
That alone is overwhelmingly fruitful.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. I guess I've been working with my daughter on college applications and admissions and FAFSA and all that stuff. I'm already experiencing Lent. I can't believe I'm at the stage of life where I'm helping my daughter go through those things, but it's been great. Yeah, it's great for her, and she will be graduating this May or June. I guess it's June.
Wow.
Yeah.
So that's coming up.
And then I told her, as soon as you cross the stage, we're giving you your keys and your bag. You're out of the house.
And she's probably already.
Yeah, I think she would do it, but no, she's not quite there yet. Although I moved out of the house when I was 18 years old.
Did you really?
I did.
Wow.
And now I look back and go, what a fool.
Well, most people aren't now. They're staying home when they're 22.
Well, that's actually normal from a historical standpoint. Yeah, I know I've read, this is a long time ago, but there was an American who traveled to some village somewhere, it doesn't matter. And the American said to this family, wow, your kids, they're well into their upper 20s. They're still living at home. And the response was, well, in our country, we love our children until death. They're not like, we got to get rid of them. It's just a kind of a cultural phenomenon there as well. But here we are. All right. So this is our first podcast of the year 2024.
It is.
And it is an election year, Father.
Unfortunately.
Yes.
So they were ever enjoyable. I don't know when that was, because they certainly aren't anymore.
Yeah, I know. And we got to talk a little bit about this because the bishops, the Council of Bishops of the United States has actually spoken about this. But before we get into that, you and I were talking right before we started recording. You had said that Pope Francis had mentioned, again, just pretty much said the same thing in his declaration, Fiducia Supplicans, that there were no changes and people are in an uproar, that he pretty much, what did you tell me?
Oh, I just said some people are frustrated, and they might say, well, he didn't really do anything. He didn't really change anything. Or there's really no, we've always done this.
Yeah.
Blessing people. Every person that wants a blessing gets a blessing. So in that sense, that's true. But he's defined parameters that maybe were unclear before and doing that. So, as you said a few weeks ago, it's a nothing burger.
Right.
All
Southern snowstorm hysteria is how I put it.
snowstorm hysteria. That's right. And I think that the attitude should just be he's changed nothing, but defined rather what now a liturgical blessing and the spontaneous simple blessing are, where before I never thought of them as different. I blessed you after Mass during the liturgy, and I blessed you in the parking lot. In my mind, I didn't think there was any difference, but now I understand that there has been some clarification there. So I suppose that is the development then that he brought. So, but I mean, here we are mid-January. Has anything changed here at St. Michael? Anything in the liturgical life? Anything in the life? But no, nothing has been, I haven't seen it impact anything at all.
Right.
So I don't know what other parishes are experiencing, but there was certainly this attitude of the end of the world, the end of the church is near. The media continues to misrepresent over and over again every time he speaks about it. Like Pope Francis defends same-sex blessings. All that lack of clarity continues. That just, it wasn't even only about same-sex couples, also about couples in irregular situations, heterosexual couples in irregular relationships. The letter was written for priests and only, wasn't written to the lay faithful, wasn't written to the universal church. So, he gave us the guidance that he felt we needed.
Yeah, I was very surprised, maybe encouraged. There's a priest. He doesn't quite have the following that Father Mike Schmitz has, but he's got a pretty significant following on social media. He serves in Canada, and I would always consider him to be really traditionalist, what we call a traditionalist. But he came out and told his parish, "This is great.
Right.
This is wonderful.
Mm-hmm.
This is pastoral in every way. This is exactly what the church should be for everybody." I don't know. I found that to be kind of an encouraging remark amid all of the mayhem and bedlam.
Right. I think so. We have to remember why the church is here, which is to draw all souls to Christ.
Right. And we're drawing all souls to Christ, and they vote. So let's talk, as we enter an election year. I don't know how many election years you've had now that you've been a priest for. 14 years. This is your 14th year. So at least 3. I mean, what goes to the mind of a priest, especially as we approach a general election? Anything differently?
I mean, we obviously in this nation continue to make sure we have to guide our people well. Their consciences are formed, as they say. But quite frankly, the election seasons they've pretty much become is the candidate pro-abortion or pro-life,
Mm-hmm.
right? So that's generally the way it's been kicked around from my recent memory, even before as a priest. So who the candidates that are pro-life, or the most pro-life candidate, and who is the ones that are not? And so because it's so polarized in our nation, it's difficult to debate and to help form consciences, because when a candidate's adamantly pro-abortion, it seems to disqualify the Catholic vote immediately, because the child in the womb, every life is sacred from the womb to the tomb, as we teach. But then you have candidates who have other policies that challenge the dignity of human life in other ways. And then you have people who want to say, well, all the issues are the same, which isn't true either. But so it's difficult. I have no idea, in fact, how to navigate, who will be the candidates that come. Might be pretty obvious at this point, but it's a little too early to tell. A lot can change, I suppose.
But it will still be emotional.
Right.
Yeah.
I'm sure it'll be ideologically. The unfortunate thing is that as American people, we're really not. I don't know how much freedom we have as far as selecting our candidates. We get told, here are the two, A or B, right? And there's others out there that might be better, but they'll never make it because they don't have enough money and they won't have enough media coverage. So, that really, I see it more clearly now than I did some years ago. That here's A or B, right? You have to vote for A or B.
Yep.
You can vote for someone else too, and write somebody in, or this much smaller unknown candidate. But we do have to participate as citizens in the country in democracy, and this is part of that. So, but it is disheartening that the quality of candidates and the selection and the lack of even having true debates and isn't there. So it's mostly just a show of vitriolic rancor and ideological shifting. So I definitely don't enjoy it. So I don't really know how to say what will happen by November, but I'm sure that we'll be guided by the bishops to focus on what we need to focus on for preparing the people to elect. But the primaries are already underway, so people should be paying attention to those probably more than the presidential election, because this apparently is when we select our candidates. Right. So, but
I know a teacher of mine says, here's democracy in the United States. It's, of course, I'll get the math wrong because I'm just freelancing here. He says democracy in the United States is when 49.1% of the population tells the other 48.2% how they're going to live for the next 4 years.
Right. Yeah. It's interesting that seems to always be so close like that too. I said,
Always.
are we so, I mean, are we so perfectly divided that there's only a few more percentage points that this nation just,
Oh, I remember the Reagan election back in the 80s. It was a total landslide. I think that's the only landslide I've ever been a part of, but I was just a little boy.
yeah.
I just remember seeing the red all over the country, and there was like Ted Koppel and Peter Jennings on the screen. I don't know if you even remember those guys. I'm dating myself now,
Well, I was that way too, but much younger.
yeah. I think it's become my earliest memories of us becoming very polarized would be Bush Gore and the Supreme Court decision. I think that had a seismic effect on the electorate in this country, where it became very partisan.
Well, I mean, the reality is that you don't get beyond Democrat Republican labels in most cases, and whatever that means, whatever that represents. And I say I'm a Democrat or a Republican, then that's just the end. There's no discussion. There won't be a discussion. It'll be just infighting. That's what my experience is. What I see.
Mm-hmm.
No room for another party. No other thought can really enter the fore.
Mm-hmm.
And obviously, the dynamics of both parties have shifted in time. Now we have Republicans touting for the middle class when I thought that was what the Democrats were supposed to be about. So, and then Democrats seem to just vie for abortion on every level. So it's like the party of abortion is the Democratic Party. So I'm sure there's people out there who don't remember the Democratic Party being that way, but now that it is, right? So, but it is difficult to see how one can go much beyond the ideologies that we're presented with.
Right. Well, and
It takes a lot of effort.
well, speaking of ideology, so the bishops know this, and so this is a draft. I think the title of it is the Annual Report on the State of Religious Liberty in the United States. Now, this was published just a couple of days ago, so this is fresh off the press. Now, this is a 50-page document. I didn't take the time to read all 50 pages. I just go right to the back. So, like in all things, right? Just skip to the very end. But they do offer some counsel to the Catholic voting bloc. And they want us as bishops, they want us as Catholics to think as Catholics this year. And so this is a section 7, and I'm not going to go over every point, but some of the main points that I drew from it regarding the forecast. So this is the section is called the Religious Liberty Forecast for 2024. So it says that here are some of the areas to watch in terms of religious liberty in the United States for the upcoming year. Here's the first one. They're speaking to the Catholics. Hostility toward ministries serving newcomers will continue. Newcomers, what's that? Immigrants. So immigration, particularly the situation at the U.S.-Mexico border, will be one of the dominant issues of the presidential election. The platform of at least one major party candidate includes defunding nonprofit organizations that serve migrants. And it is possible that the party's nominee, whoever it is, will endorse this measure to some degree. Efforts in Congress to investigate Catholic ministries serving newcomers may receive new momentum if the Republican nominee adopts a similarly hostile position. Now, I did a little bit of research on this. There's actually a provision somewhere, a proposed bill, that if you are an agency that's not tied to the government and you are serving migrants and immigrants, you can be defunded.
So that's Catholic Charities.
That would be the presumption.
But I'm just saying, that is Catholic Charities. That's what they do.
Okay.
Especially in their own diocese.
Right.
Helping, migrants and giving them what they need to be established. And again, I don't know, if there's evaluations of, legality of why a person is here, or how a person is in our country. But I think that the Catholic Charities says there's a person in need. We don't ask, how did you get here?
Mm-hmm.
Here they are.
Right.
That's the issue. That's the debate.
Right.
So, again, what is the response? Now, there's going to be a national response, right?
Mm-hmm.
People will say, well, you're not here legally, so deportation.
Right.
So the Catholic Church is here to say, there's a human being in front of me who's here, distressed. I don't know why they're here, how they got here. Maybe it was illegally. And is that the church's role to say, oh, you're not here legally, so I guess we should turn you in, and you need to go back to your own country.
Mm-hmm.
So obviously that's a massive realm of debate, and
Of course it is.
and the government has to make decisions on, every government has to make decisions on who comes into the country.
Absolutely.
I don't think that, I think this idea that, well, you are taking care of people here illegally, you don't want borders, you don't want protection. Well, that's absurd.
That's absurd.
So, and there's no country on this planet that doesn't have security. I mean, I can't just decide to go to Italy or decide to go to China or some other nation and just go in there, and Canada, and just say, oh, you have security at the border, I'm going to just ignore that. And I mean, the nation has the rights to make laws to secure itself. So, but that there are, I mean, I don't know what to say why people come illegally into the United States. Obviously, one would be a better life, a safer life, fleeing from a oppressive regime or something like that, looking for a new beginning. Okay, now that's a person who's trying to have a new life. Obviously, people take advantage of anything. So, but again, you started by saying we need to think with the Catholic mind and the heart and mind of the church. And that's going to be the underpinning that we should return to for the next several months, because you can't think like a Democrat or a Republican.
That's exactly right.
And we are.
That's why they wrote this.
And that's what we have to begin to do now. The other issue is being involved in the political life, and the more that the Catholic lay faithful do not to get involved, and that doesn't mean I go vote, that's my involvement. Yes, that's important, but trying to make headway, getting into politics, getting into policy locally, in local government. I mean, that everyone thinks, oh, I should be in politics. I must have to get to Congress and get to Washington. No, get involved in city council, get involved on school boards, get involved in maybe state legislature, local mayor races. I don't know, but some people have those talents and those gifts, and the more we just recede, right, and just say, well, I'm just not going to get involved, this is too hard. It is very difficult. I can't even imagine. But the guarantee is if we definitely do nothing, then those will just bulldoze over the rest of us with their agendas.
Yeah. And we have a moral obligation as Catholics to care for the immigrant. And that comes right out of the scriptures. If you look at the Old Testament, it's interesting, the command to love your neighbor. It appears twice in the Torah. Twice. Love your neighbor. But the other command to love the stranger and the alien appears 36 times, according to the rabbis. Far more than the command to love your neighbor. So there was a great rabbi who once says, if you're really going to weigh, put it in the scales, what the kind of love God wants, the command to love the alien, the stranger, and the immigrant outweighs even the love to neighbor. Why? Because they are, for all of us, sometimes the hardest to love. We don't know them. So I think as what the bishops are trying to say, we have a moral obligation to uphold the dignity and the rights of the stranger. It doesn't mean we don't say, well, we don't have borders. It doesn't mean any of that, but we have a responsibility to care for them. And the bishops are warning us as Catholics, don't get sucked into the rhetoric, because behind it could be something that's against our social teaching.
Right. Right. And the nation has to judge how it evaluates people here illegally.
Well, yes,
I mean that's going to be something that they have to handle, but the church's mind would be, well, every human person has equal dignity. It doesn't matter whether they're here legally or not, right? The human dignity remains. So we have to figure out how we respond in the midst of this crisis, right? Because it is a crisis on some level.
Yeah, it's a crisis.
It's a word crisis is not a made-up word. It's definitely constantly underway, and the country has to work to figure out how to handle the situation.
Yes,
and those that are already here, and obviously there are people who could be here that are here illegally, and they're doing horrible things in the country, taking advantage of every system, and who knows, bringing in drugs or committing crimes, other great crimes, and they're already here illegally. So. But then you have people who are running for their lives, maybe trying to get away from a horrible culture to start over. And yes, they are here illegally too, women and children and families, and now what? So
Okay.
I'm glad I don't have to make that. I don't have to find the solution to that.
Sure. But as Catholics, we have to be aware,
Sure.
so even
the
if,
Catholic, the Catholic response isn't, I mean, we're not going to find in the catechism some de facto, well, we have to be for deportation
sure.
or something like that.
No. So, okay. So that's the first one to be mindful of. The second one that they forecast would be, and this would become probably as no surprise, abortion and Dobbs, the case that overturned Roe v. Wade, as a campaign issue. Abortion remains a primary focus of the national political debate. For the bishops, it remains the preeminent issue. Now, this is language right out of this is from the National Catholic Reporter back in November of 2023, November 15th. The U.S. Catholic bishops decided on November 15th, just a couple of months ago, at their General Assembly here, that the threat of abortion will remain the preeminent priority for their political guidance to Catholic voters in the year leading up to the 2024 presidential election. Promotion of access to abortion tends to be associated with hostility toward the exercise of beliefs about abortion, such as religious and conscientious objections to participating in or facilitating abortion. After Dobbs, the Committee for Religious Liberty braced for a wave of efforts to curtail the exercise of religious objections to abortion. This did not materialize to the extent feared, but there are some notable examples. I want to say a few things. Supporters of abortion are often hostile toward the idea that morality can be a basis for public policy. Access to abortion is often framed as freedom from religion, characterizing religion as oppressive. A familiar slogan in the abortion debates has been, "Keep your rosaries off my ovaries." But it's not just a religious objection for Catholics. It's more than that. How would you say it is a fundamental life issue, not a religious issue?
Right. Yeah, because we believe in the dignity of the human person. So that's what the defense is. It's not a religious principle.
Yeah.
That one doesn't bring oneself into existence, that all life is a gift. One is not here because one person has chosen to be here.
Sure.
And so when we look at our own nation in the struggles with civil rights, for example, that all are created equal, men and women, every race, creed, color. And we have a history in our nation of our own people rising up to defend the rights and the dignity of the human person, especially with regards to racism and slavery. And yes, horrible evil, but Americans stood up and fought against that evil and tried to, influence the culture, right? To see everybody as a brother and sister, right? So that wasn't a religious principle of a religion, like, oh, that's just a facet of faith. I don't need to. This is that every human person has an inherent dignity that the state doesn't determine that. The state doesn't decide and vote, oh, you have value and you don't. But that's what's happening when abortion and other things other crimes against humanity are allowed to be controlled by the state. So we have to first understand that every human person has inherent dignity that comes from God, not from the state, not from the country, not from the government. The government doesn't give and impart upon this person a dignity.
What do you say to people? Because this is out there as well. The bishops have said this is the preeminent priority. Okay, we were obedient to the bishops. We will make this a preeminent priority for us. But I brought up my daughter to begin the podcast. I just happened to have a conversation with her very recently. And her statement to me was, why does the Catholic Church only focus on abortion? It seems that whenever I hear from a bishop or their Catholics on the news, it's always about abortion. But what about poverty? What about healthcare? What about education? What about the war happening in Israel? What about the children being bombed in Gaza City? Why doesn't the Catholic Church speak about that? Because it seems that they're just all about only abortion, And from which I told her, I said, "You mean sola abortion? Kind of a sola fide, sola scriptura." What do you say to young people, or even just Catholics in general, who have the same kind of thinking that it's Catholic social teaching is broader than just abortion?
Well, it certainly is, right. But I think that the issue with abortion is because of the manner in which the human person is attacked, which is in the womb. So it's the most defenseless state a human person can be in. Wars and other, I mean, there is the ability for a person to at least have some access to defense, even to scream out for help, right, or to run and hide or whatever. But a child in the womb has no defense whatsoever. Cannot cry for help. Can't avoid it. So that, I think, is why the church continually says, the preeminent issue is abortion, but doesn't mean it's the only thing we focus on. The problem is that in our own nation, it's so ideological with abortion. It's the flag. It's the flag of parties. We're for abortion and we're against abortion, or to what varying degrees, right? So when that's the only thing that differentiates the front-running party candidates, it can certainly become that way. But there are issues in the church that the church teaches on, and it's Catholic social teaching, which is broader than just focusing on the sacredness of life in the womb. But because the life in the womb is sacred, that's why all life is sacred. So that's why we do care about the immigrant, the war-torn people that are sex trafficking, racism, all these things, that euthanasia. They're all different levels, but they're all attacks and denigrations of the human person. I mean, we should obviously be against pornography and child pornography, because they denigrate and devalue the human person. Why is the church adamant against slavery? Because it denigrates and devalues the human person. So we have to look at it with a holistic approach. But part of the frustration is there seems to be little room to begin to debate and work on these other issues and protections, because there's such a vehement, apparently or seemingly stark contrast in candidates that put for themselves up for election in our country is, well, we're here first to tell you that we're for abortion. We're here to tell you that we're against abortion. And so then there's that. And then, so the one who's for abortion also seems to be concerned about having more peace, or figuring out how to or to reform immigration, or even healthcare. So yeah, but they don't have any policies that protect life in the womb.
Because you have to be alive for all of those other laws to apply.
Right.
It comes down to a fundamental logic. But I sensed her frustration and the frustration of others.
Oh yeah, I mean, it's interesting that she picks up on that. I guess that means that even in her generation, the messaging seems to be that way. It's not what the church teaches. We have a whole body of Catholic social teaching.
Right.
Right. But again, with the media, the way it works, it does seem that's just the issue. It's not only, they say, well, why are Catholics only focused on abortion? Well, it's also where the media continues to go to define the approach of different people. Right. It seems to me the media will say, well, this is a pro-abortion, anti-abortion group, candidate, individual, religious movement, couching it, defining it with its approach towards the affirmation or rejection of abortion.
Yeah. So
I mean, it just feeds itself, and that's my opinion. I haven't done research on this. I don't know that to be the case, but what seems to be the buzzword. Right.
Yeah. And we should probably look into some of the principles of Catholic social teaching, maybe another podcast. I know I've seen a document through the USCCB, the 7 key themes of Catholic social teaching, and they touch all of us, and they touch our partisanship in every direction as well. But that frustration is there. But the bishops are saying, nevertheless, abortion, it's preeminent, and it will be exploited this year. It'll be a central talking point. All right. The third one, gender ideology as a campaign issue. The topic of gender ideology will likely play a similarly prominent role in the presidential campaign as the topic of abortion. As with abortion, support of gender ideology tends to be associated with hostility to the exercise of religious beliefs and moral convictions, upholding the sexual difference between men and women. In the arena of messaging, those who promote affirmation of LGBT identities tend to frame their position as one of love, acceptance, and equality. while those who oppose gender ideology generally argue that their position is foremost a matter of truth and common sense. Catholicism maintains the reciprocal relationship between love and truth. As such, the Church and individual Catholic faithful will be challenged to maintain this authentic voice as the two competing narratives dominate the conversation on this issue. So what the bishops are saying is that the Catholic way is right in the middle. We are about loving, but we are about truth. It's not bifurcated in any way. But I see this as definitely as a growing the tidal wave that's encroaching on the church.
Sure, I think you're right about that.
Yep. Number four, partisanship and division within the church itself. Catholics will, as much as ever, and they're speaking about this year, be seen as a target demographic for partisan appeal during the 2024 election. Yeah, well, I've seen that. I've seen that about every 4 years. I know there was one candidate who said to a group of Catholics, "You have to vote for me. You have no choice. You have no choice. You can't vote for the other guy because he's for abortion, these, that, and the other." The pressure of the election will exacerbate trends of partisan division within the church and the pull of party over faith. This dynamic is not new. It's not unique to Catholics, nor will it disappear anytime soon, but it will be especially salient in 2024. And the long-term standing of the church in the public square requires a conscious and sustained turn away from partisanship and toward the gospel. Your thoughts on that? Partisanship within the church.
Well said. That party over faith, is that what it said?
Well, yeah, we can't think that way.
It said party over platform. What's the phrase that was that they said there?
Well, I don't know exactly which phrase was just that it'll be trend. It says that this dynamic is not new, but it will be especially salient in 2024. And the longstanding of the church in the public square requires a conscious and sustained turn away from partisanship toward the gospel.
It was right before that.
The pressures of the election will exacerbate trends of partisan division within the church and the pull of party over faith. Yeah.
Party over faith. So we got to be on guard about that at all times.
Yeah.
But do we know our faith well enough to?
Well, there you go. I'll speak on that.
That's the danger. Is that we already know from looking at the results of the discussions of the synod that one of the things that's prevalent not only in the United States but in other nations is the lack of understanding of Catholic social teaching.
Yeah.
I mean, in the fullness of what that is.
Yes.
I'm not sure Catholics say, well, I know we're against abortion, dignity of human person, and euthanasia, and physician-assisted suicide, all things we vehemently oppose, as we should, because the gospel calls us to that. But that does not the period follow that point. There's way more Catholic social teaching that's there. And if we don't know that body of teaching, then we'll continue to just sort of guide the nation without that guidance that the church is giving us.
Yep. Well, then the bishops go on to list what they forecast are the 5 largest threats to religious liberty in 2024. I'll go over these real quick. 5 threats. So we talked about the 5 things that 4 things that they see in the forecast. And I'll remind you again, hostility toward immigrants. Don't be pulled into that. Abortion as just a religious issue. Don't be pulled into that. And what was the other one just now? Partisanship within the church. Don't be pulled into partisanship as Catholics as well. But what they see is threats. This is their forecast. Number 1, which is a surprise to me, they see attacks on houses of worship as the predominant threat of 2024. The Committee on Religious Liberty regards attacks on houses of worship as the largest threat to religious liberty in 2024. Were this threat limited to a continuation of property crimes that have been perpetuated on Catholic churches over recent years, perhaps it would not be the committee's chief concern. However, boiling tensions over Israel-Hamas conflict have elevated the chances of a terrorist attack on a synagogue or a mosque. Meanwhile, the highly charged atmosphere around the 2024 election might lead far-left extremists to escalate the severity of attacks on Catholic churches. And far-right extremists may view Catholic churches and Catholic charities as targets for anti-immigrant sentiment or worse, violent action. That's number 1. They fear attacks on houses of worship. Number two, the second greatest threat to religious liberty, according to the bishops, would be Section 1557 regulation. No foreseeable legal development in 2024 poses a greater threat to religious liberty than the Health and Human Services Section 1557 regulation. Despite lip service paid to concerns of religious liberty, it appears to be specifically intended to force Catholic hospitals and religious healthcare workers to perform harmful gender transition procedures, including on children. Among the various federal regulations advancing gender ideology, its harms are the most severe. The final regulation may also include a mandate to perform abortions. And so this would also include at Catholic hospitals as well. So this is a proposed bill from the Health and Human Services. It's Section 1557, and the bishops are asking us to speak out against it. In other words, what it would do is if you are someone who wants to object to giving transgender surgery to someone, you would be considered discrimination. You could be sued. Right. That's the second threat. Any comments on that?
No, that's all news to me, but it makes sense. I mean, it's the same with the politics regarding abortion, trying to get that to be to eliminate conscientious objections to that.
Yeah. And by the way, everybody listening, I did not tell Father what we were talking about today, so I'm unloading on him right now. All right. So the third greatest threat that the bishops see is threats, and we just spoke about this a moment ago, is threats to Catholic ministries serving immigrants. They call them newcomers. Welcoming the stranger, feeding the hungry, sheltering the homeless. These fundamental calls to Christian service are at the heart of Catholic service to newcomers, which is itself a core ministry of the Church. What is proposed is that, as we said, those who service the newcomers or immigrants will be denied funding. Denying public aid to a religious charity because it heeds this gospel call is a paradigmatic example of an unconstitutional condition on government funds. Let your representatives in Congress know that you support immigration reform for the common good, but not violations of the religious freedom of charities striving to serve newcomers in need.
Right. Yeah, that puts it out there very holistically.
Yeah. Number four, the fourth greatest threat, the suppression of religious speech upholding marriage and sexual difference. The right to free exercise of religion and the right to free speech often intersect on matters of sexual orientation and gender identity. In numerous settings, individuals are being pressured to conform to the orthodoxy of gender ideology. In 2024, this pressure may have the force of law via various federal agency actions, including the Title IX regulation and the EEOC's enforcement of its guidance on workplace harassment. There are few freedoms more basic or more inherent to the American political and social order than the right to say what is true and not to be compelled to profess what is false. People of faith must guard against erosion of this right. Be an example. He's calling all of us. Be an example of how people of faith can voice beliefs about marriage and sexual difference with clarity and compassion. The USCCB initiative, Marriage, Upholding Unique for a Reason, is a valuable resource for parishes. In other words, our right to speak out as Catholics will be suppressed. That's the greatest threat. And the fifth greatest threat is the EEOC's Pregnant Workers Fairness Act regulation. I won't read through this, but there is a provision in place right now, and the Catholic Church is asking the faithful to stand against it, that abortion for women who undergo abortion, they must be entitled to the same leave rights as women who have a child. So what we would call maternity leave or paternity leave, there must be a provision for those who seek to have an abortion. They must have time off to recover from that as well. So those are the top five threats to religious freedom. And if you stand against it, if you're like a Catholic church, you've got an employee who you would not be able to say no.
Yeah, and that'll be creating more confusion, because if you're putting that against the one who's choosing to have a child versus the one who's choosing to abort a child, giving them leave makes the child irrelevant. It's like, well, it doesn't matter.
Right.
So that's the danger. One of the great dangers I see about that kind of a bill going through.
Well, we're just going to be bombarded with just the messaging and commercials and ads and everywhere we look. I mean, I'm exhausted just thinking about what lies ahead. It's going to be so vitriolic, and it's going to be so, yeah.
But I think if we can get in front of it and spiritually, prepare ourselves by prayer and focusing on what the church teaches and Catholic social teaching, and spending time in prayer and the gospel and closeness to Christ, and not in resisting as much as we can to be pulled into the vitriolic nature of what's going to happen is happening, and we should expect to happen at a fuller scale than maybe ever before in the months ahead. So just to expect it, but not to say, well, I need to be plugged into these media outlets in the next 10 months to stay on point with everything. We need to probably spend the time more learning our faith, getting firmly rooted in it, so that our consciences are formed and by the time election time comes.
Yeah, I often say to some of our newest converts that if you try to compartmentalize Catholicism or your Catholic faith, it'll drive you crazy. It can't be compartmentalized.
Right.
And what the bishops are trying to say, and what the church has always said, is that you cannot wear a Catholic hat in one arena and take it off in another. You are Catholic in every arena, in every venue of public life. And as Catholics, we have an obligation to always speak as Catholics and with the mind of the church on all of these issues, because you find that, you may be a Republican, but Catholic social teaching on an issue that the Republican Party may be touting is at variance with Catholic social teaching. And you need to stand up for the Catholic social teaching, even as a Republican.
Indeed.
And the same thing with a Democrat. You may be a Democrat, and there are things that will bump up against Catholic social teaching. You, as a Democrat, are Catholic first.
Right. Absolutely.
Well, thank you, Father, for this time.
Informative. I think that'll be informative for our listeners, that it's probably good to have a forecast so early in to get our minds prepped way earlier.
Yeah, that's right. And again, the name of the document, it was the Annual Report on Religious Liberty. It's on the USCCB website, the United States Council of Catholic Bishops. Is that what it is? Yep. And you can download this. It's 50 pages long, but the issues that we were speaking about come in section 7 and section 8, and you can read it for yourself. And maybe in a future podcast, maybe next week, we'll look at some of the key tenets of Catholic social teaching and what that means, because I know when we had a conversation about the Synod was very clear. Catholics, by and large, are not informed about Catholic social teaching.
That's true.
All right. Well, thank you, Father, for joining us again. Thank you all for listening. If you want more information about our parish, visit our website at stmccg.org. And remember, everyone, stay always on the bark of Peter. God bless. Bye-bye.